All right, so let's continue our discussions on metaphysics. It's been a while. And in the last episode, we talked about persons. I brought some arguments as to why we are simple entities, we are constituted by our bodies. And today I will be talking about the power of will. So if you want to check out those arguments, you can watch previous videos. So basically the conclusion was that we are simple entities constituted by our bodies. And before I go to the power of will, I'm going to drop another interesting argument that I saw in support of this conclusion, because we argued in different ways. We argued from the understanding that we have from different kinds of things and the ontological laws, persistent conditions, and some principles from mereology that we are not identical to our bodies. We defend the substance dualism based on that. And also we use these mereological principles to show why we are simple. Now, this is a very interesting conclusion in the end, that we are simple entities constituted by our bodies. The simplicity is interesting because we can have other arguments also for substance dualism that will take a different route, but it seems to get to the same conclusion, and that's interesting. Another argument, for instance, comes from mereological nihilism. So now we're not mereological nihilists in this kind of metaphysical course, because we already talked about composite objects and the ontological relation of composition. But if someone is a mereological nihilist, then they can have a good argument for substance dualism, and more particular for this kind of specific substance dualism, that we are simple entities. And the argument is very simple, basically. So mereological nihilism says that there are no composite objects. There are no such a thing as, at least fundamentally, there are no such a thing as composite objects. So premise one is basically everything that exists is simple. Simple in terms of metaphysically simple. It doesn't have any proper parts. So everything that exists is simple. Premise two, I exist, therefore I'm simple. Simple as that. And premise four, my body is not simple, therefore I'm not identical with my body. So 3 and 5 gives us the conclusion that we're looking for, that we're defending for substance dualism. We're not identical to our body, and we are simple entities. The same conclusion that we got from our own understanding of ontology and the persistent conditions that we had. All right, so that's persons, right? So we're assuming that's true. We are from the ontological kind person, the natural kind person, and we want to investigate a power that we have called will. So if you remember, so any kind of entity, concrete entity that we look at, basically is an instance of a kind, and from that natural kind and the characteristics of that kind, we get powers. We get some kind of exemplification, some kind of dispositional exemplifications that we characterized as powers. So we are a concrete entity, an instance. We are a material entity, an instance of a natural kind person. So it's natural to suppose that we are also, we are able to do things. We also have powers with their own unique manifestation. And one of those powers is the power of a will that I'm going to explain and get into it. Okay, so what is will? The way that we will characterize the power of will is that it's a spontaneous power, it's a non-causal power. Now we'll get into it, what that means. But first of all, we all know what we mean by will, all right? So willing is a manifestation, or volition is a manifestation of this power. And basically that's when we choose to do something. So when we will to do something, that's the power that we're talking about. So you willed to click on this video, I willed to record this video. So that's will, I willed the composition of these slides. So these are the things that I willed. And so we manifest and we use that, we exercise that power to get these effects and manifestations. All right, so What does it mean that it's a spontaneous power and it's a non-causal power, our will? So first I will start with the non-causal power. Now, if you don't know about these terms, then I have a video again in the series on powers. I explain what it means to be causal and non-causal, but just a refresher here. So a non-causal power is a power whose manifestation does not consist in causing a change in anything. So if you remember, we had these powers, and the powers had a manifestation, and that manifestation either consists in causing a change to happen in something else, or it doesn't. For example, the power of water to dissolve common salt is a causal power because its manifestation just consists in dissolving water, in causing change to happen in something else. The power of a magnet, it's a causal power because when it manifests, it attracts metal particles to itself, so it causes a change in those things to happen. But there are some powers which are non-causal. So the non-causal power is a power that does not consist in causing a change in anything. So for example, when you have a metal that you put in a magnetic field and it becomes a magnet, it did have a power to become magnetized. We also call it a liability. Now that power, when it manifests, the manifestation of that power does not consist in causing any change. The metal rod does not cause any change in anything, even in itself, for that thing to become manifest. Something else causes a change. There is that magnetic field has a causal power, and that's the thing that's causing a change in the metal. And the manifestation of the metal does not itself consist in causing a change in something else. So that's a non-causal power. So what we're claiming is that the power of will that we have is also a non-causal power. So when we manifest our power, it doesn't consist in causing a change. And this is a little bit weird because we expect it to be causal, because we think, okay, we will things and we cause a change, right? So how come that I'm claiming that it's a non-causal power? But we have to be really careful here because the powers, the identity condition of powers comes from their manifestation. So we have to be really careful about the manifestation so we can actually distinguish the power that we're talking about. And the reason that we're saying that the power of will is non-causal is because of the experience that we have. So imagine that you're paralyzed, but you're not aware that you're paralyzed. You wake up one day and you want to lift your arm. So you want to raise your arm, but you're not aware of it, but you're paralyzed. What happens is that you will to raise your arm, but nothing happens. And the point is that, as we're assuming here, nothing is happening. So if the powerful will is a causal power, and of course, if there is anything that's going to happen as its manifestation, if it is a causal power, then it would be the raising, or at least the rising of my arm. That would be the manifestation of it, right? But the point is that if we are paralyzed, then the arm wouldn't go up. So if the manifestation of will consists in my rising, in my raising of my arm, if it consists in that, then it would mean that if I am paralyzed, then my will not be manifested. But that's false, because when we want to raise our arm and it doesn't come up, we do something, and that's why we are surprised. Like you want to raise your arm, you will to raise your arm, but it doesn't come up, and you're like, what happened? Why are we surprised? Well, because we did something at this moment that we used to do before, and in all those previous times that we did it, it always led to my arms rising, but this time it didn't. So the point is that we did the same thing. So if I'm not paralyzed and I can will to raise my arm and my arm actually comes up, my arms rising, basically my volition or manifestation of my will does not consist in my arms rising. It can still manifest even without my arms rising. And that's why we feel that we did something. We willed my arm to rise, so it manifested even though my arm did not rise. So if it's a manifestation and if nothing's happening, I didn't cause any change, I'm paralyzed, I cannot change anything. So if I willed something but there were no change, then it means that my will was non-causal. It was manifested, but it did not consist in causing any change. So that's why, if you think about it, we realize that we can will to raise our arm without its rising, and because of that, it's a non-causal power. And in the same sense, again, my arm can also be raised without my willing. Like if you put some electrodes in my brain and you send some electrical signal, so my arm goes up, that's not the manifestation of my will. That's a different thing. Like my arm would go up in exactly the same way that I would raise it, but I would deny that I am willing to raise it. I'm not willing and my arm is just going up. You know, you're sending some electrical signal, it's just going up. I'm not willing it. So again, it seems that what the manifestation of my will is, the volition that I have, is different from my arms going up. So it's a non-causal power. But of course, there's still this question that if it's non-causal power, then how can we affect the world? And this is where the second order powers come in. Now, if you remember, we talked about second order powers where you had something that had a power which was non-causal, and when that power gets manifested, it gains a causal power. It gains a second order power. We gave the example of that metallic rod, which gets magnetized, and after it gets magnetized, now it has a causal power to attract metal particles to itself. We can also give the example of a stone. If you throw a stone, so a stone has the power to be thrown, like a small stone has this power to be thrown, and that's a non-causal power. When it gets manifested, that manifestation does not consist in causing any change. The stone does not cause any change in anything for that power to be manifested. I have the power, I throw it, so I have the causal power. I make that the power of that stone manifested. So the power, now that the power of being thrown is manifested, the stone gains a second order power. Now it gains, because of its momentum, now it gains a causal power, for instance, to break something. So it's the same thing with us. So when we will something, volition, our willing, is a non-causal manifestation. But through our willing, through our volition, we gain a causal power. Now, the interesting thing is about these second order powers that when the second order power is causal, I mean for any causal power, because the manifestation consists in causing a change in something, it means that whenever we have a causal power, for its manifestation, we also need another thing with the non-causal power, with the power or the liability to be changed, right? Because otherwise you wouldn't be able to manifest the power of the first thing. So when you throw that stone and the stone gains that causal power, for that causal power to be manifested, for that stone to manifest the causal power of, for instance, breaking something, you have to have something fragile in front of it. So you have a window, you have a glass, and then you throw at it. Now that glass has the liability to be broken, and it gets manifested, that power of breaking the window. So it's the same thing with us. So the power of will is similar to the power of stone to be thrown. Both are non-causal, but the bearer gains causal power by their manifestation. So we need three ingredients here for the whole chain to happen. One, We need a suitable substance with non-causal power. So that's a person. That's the substance with the power of a will. Or in the other example is a stone with the power to be thrown. We need the manifestation of that non-causal power and gaining causal power. For the person, a will, that was volition. For the stone, that's being thrown. And the third element is a suitable substance with power to be changed, with liability. In our case, it would be our body. So if you have two of them, but not the third one, nothing would happen. Because the second order causal power will not be manifested. So when I will, my will is a non-causal power. But when I do it, when I will something, I gain causal power because of that willing. The will itself is non-causal, but I gain another power which is causal. Now that causal power requires another substance with liability, for instance, my body. Now if that body is not liable, if that body does not have the power to be moved, for instance, it's paralyzed. If it's paralyzed, then that body is not liable to be moved. Then the causal power that I gain by willing cannot be manifested. So that's why it's strange for us that when I want to raise my arm and it doesn't come up, we are like, what happened? I did have the power to move my arm. What happened right now? Well, because your body now is not liable to move. So that's our understanding of will as a non-causal power. And of course, the objection to this non-causal power would be the causal closure of physical world. Now we'll come back to causal closure, not at this lecture, but in the next lecture, I will come back to causal closure. So basically, I will get to it there, but simply causal closure says that the physical world that we see, we look at the causal chain, we always see something physical there. There's no gap in those physical chains for the person. We've never seen person doing anything. If I'm saying that it's my volition and it's gaining the causal power that I as a person have to move my arm, then I'm basically saying that I am part of the causal history, or at least somehow involved in the causation of my arms going up. But then the causal closure of physical world says, okay, my arm is a physical thing, it's going up, it's kind of nervous activity. So if I look into my neurons, then I will see some neurological activity there, and then that thing is a physical thing. It has its own physical cause, and nowhere in this story, in this web of cause and effects, do we see a person with its own causal powers. So where is it? Where is that second order power that we're talking about? So that's the causal closure of physical world. I will talk about it in the next lecture, which would be probably our last lecture. So let's go to the second part, which is will as a spontaneous power. What does it mean? Our volition is our willing, and it is not determined by anything prior to our willing. So we call it spontaneous because it's similar to spontaneous radioactive decay of particles. That has, now in those cases we have an intrinsic uncertainty. So these radioactive material that we have, they have a half-life. So after a while they will decay. And if you have like one of those particles, they will decay, so something will happen to them and they will split, and then there's nothing, at least as far as we know up to this point in time, the best our physics can afford right now, there's nothing prior to that event that can tell us that the atom is going to decay at this moment. Like if you have like a big chunk of that material, then we know that okay, this mass, it has a half-life, so we know that during that time, after that time, at least half of it has been decayed. But if you have one single, then we only have a probability, and there's nothing that we can tell that is going to decay at this moment or 1 hour later. So in that sense, it's a spontaneous in the sense that it will happen whenever it happens. Like there's nothing prior to its happening that can tell us that it's going to happen. It's a spontaneous. So what we're claiming is that our will is also something like that. So if I want to will something, my willing is a spontaneous. If I want to will my arm to raise, it's a spontaneous in a sense that it will happen whenever it happens. There's nothing prior to my willing that determines that it's going to happen now, or 2 seconds later, or 10 seconds later, or now. It's a spontaneous thing, you know. I just do it whenever I want to do it. It's at that moment. It just happens whenever it happens. It's a spontaneous. Of course, there's a big difference between these two cases. One case is that there's an intrinsic uncertainty. It's not that the atom is choosing, you know, that I'm going to decay now, you know. There's kind of a random event happening there. For our case, it's not random. It's rational, in a sense that we choose for a reason. We deliberate over it, and then we say, okay, you know what, I'm going to do it now, or maybe tomorrow for this reason, or maybe I'm not going to do it for these other reasons. So it's not a random thing that just happens and there's no explanation why it happened at this moment and not 10 seconds later. When I do something, when I decided to record this video today and not tomorrow, there's a reason for it. It's not just, there's no explanation for it. No, there is an explanation for it. I have a reason why I did it today. Tomorrow I'm not going to be here to record this. So it's a spontaneous power. In that sense, it's not determined by anything prior to my willing. Now, of course, there's a very famous objection to this, and that's determinism. The claim that no, it is actually determined. Your willing, whatever you're doing, is part of this whole state of the universe, and determinism is a claim that if we know the state at some time, if I know the physical laws, that I can determine exactly what's going to happen later in the future. Now, I will not spend any time on determinism because I already made 3 videos on that, rejecting scientific determinism and also arguing why we don't have a good argument for metaphysical determinism. There's a refresher on special relativity, and then also a video on why special relativity does not lead to metaphysical determinism, actually undermines it. So I will not get into determinism. The next video will be only on causal closure. So basically, these are the two properties that we're focusing on: the spontaneous power, non-causal, that has 2 objections, and we will deal with those objections. The term is already being dealt with. Causal closure I will do it the next lecture. So for now, let's assume that both of these objections can be answered, and we do have this power. We do have this kind of spontaneous, non-causal power. Which is a very interesting power in a sense that it's free, because it's spontaneous and nothing determines it. I determine for whatever reason that I see fit when to do what I do or what to do. And it's non-causal. I gain causal power, and then through that causal power I can cause changes to happen. Some points on this on wills being free. So there are 2 main reasons why our will should be free, in a sense that it shouldn't be determined by something prior. First of all, rationality requires freedom. So rationality means to act in the light of a reason. So if you're watching this video, you're watching it for a reason. I mean, if you are watching it for a reason, then it's a rational choice that you did. You know, if you just say there's no explanation why I'm watching this, then it's not a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but the point is that it's not a rational act that you're doing. It's not a rational thing that you're doing. It doesn't mean that it's a wrong thing or it's a bad thing. It's just a category that we were defining here. That a rational act is an act that's done in the light of a reason. If you have a reason why you're watching this video right now, then what you're doing is a rational act. But the point is that if you're not free, in a sense that we are caused to act, because some people believe this, some people believe that there's a combination, there are these kind of mental states that we have and they cause us. You have some desire and then you have some beliefs, and then the sum of these things, they cause you to act. Then if you're caused to act, then we're not really considering a reason. So what we're doing is not really rational. Even if it's reasonable, it's not rational, because rational means that you do something because you considered those reasons. But if something, even those reasons, cause you to act, then you're not doing that thing because you considered those things, but rather because you were caused by those things. This is clear if you think about arguments. Like if I tell you premises of an argument and the premises are true and the argument is valid, then you accept the conclusion. But you accept the conclusion in the light considering the fact that premises were true and the argument was valid. So these two reasons, in the light of these two observations that you made, you accept the conclusion as true. But imagine that someone tells you that you are caused to believe that the conclusion is true. So the moment that you see premises are true and the moment that you see the argument is valid, you are caused to believe that the conclusion is true. But if you think about it, if that's what's happening, then we cannot really say that we accept the conclusion as true. It's not a rational assent to the truth of the conclusion. It's not that in the light of these reasons, in considering the truth of the premises and in considering the truth of validity, I accept the truth of conclusion. No, you were caused to accept the conclusion. And you think about it, that basically destroys that rationality even behind accepting the conclusion of a valid argument. So as I said, there is this kind of objection that no, actually we're caused by our mental states. And I will come back to that objection. The second one is that morality requires freedom. We need to be able to choose freely to be asker of the normative question. Now, you should remember that was what a person was, right, in terms of different properties in terms of knowing and being aware of what you're doing. It was also that we are the asker of the normative question, in the sense that we ask, what should I do? Is what I'm doing right or wrong? But that only makes sense if you are free to ask that. Basically, if you're free to choose between these different options. Now, some people, of course, there's an objection that that determinism is compatible with this this kind of moral freedom or this kind of normative behavior. But I will come back also to that. So just one more slide for each one of them, just to give a quick check on these objections. So why is it that we shouldn't say that we are caused by our mental states? Because first of all, as I said, if you're caused, that we're not really free, then decisions can never be rational. If you're caused to do something, if you're caused to accept the conclusion of an argument, then your assent is not rational. You didn't do a rational move from premises to conclusion. You were just caused to it, in the same sense that you throw a stone and the window breaks down. The window act of breaking down is not a rational act. It didn't break down because it considered something or for a reason. No, it was caused to break down. So in the same sense, if our will is not free, then decisions can never be rational. But the second problem, a major problem, is that causation is a very, very specific relation, is a transitive relation, which basically means that if A causes B, is a sufficient cause for B, and B is sufficient for C, then A is sufficient for C. But that can get us in trouble, because imagine this example, that there are two climbers. This comes from Davidson work on action. Imagine two people are climbing. I mean, one of them is you, and then your friend is about to fall down, and the only thing that's holding him back is your rope, right? So he's hanging to your rope, and you're also hanging from your own rope. And the point is that at this point you have a choice to make. You realize that, okay, the rope that you have is not enough. You know, the pin that you have, the nail that you have is not enough. Is not strong enough to hold both of you. So, but the only way that your friend can survive is that, you know, he stays attached to you. So you have a knife in your hand, and you have a choice to make. You can either cut the rope, considering in the light of this reason that pin cannot hold both of you, so you're like, you know, I'm going to save my own life. Or you don't do that, and then you try to save your friend's life, right? Because if you cut the rope, he's going to die. So you have these two choices. So in the first scenario, the scenario is that you think about it, and you're like, you know what, I'm going to cut the rope. So you look at the reasons, and you're like, I'm going to cut the rope. I'm going to save myself for that reason. So you cut the rope, and your friend dies. Now imagine that case, right? So the point is that you had a desire, and the desire is to save yourself. And you have that belief that if I cut the rope, I will survive, my friend will die. And in the light of considering these different things, you decide to cut the rope. Now imagine a second case where you're exactly the same situation, and you're thinking about these different options again. You're like, okay, the pin cannot handle, so either I have to cut the rope, or I have to risk my own life as well here. Now imagine that while you're thinking about cutting the rope, while you're still thinking about these different reasons, the image of your friend falling down and you making this decision is just so traumatizing that your hand shakes. And because of trauma, you cut the rope by accident. You don't want to do it, but your hand jerks, and then you just cut the rope. Now, your friend dies, you survive. It's exactly the same thing that happens in the first scenario. Now, if the decisions that we make, if our willing is caused by our states, right? If that's the analysis, then if I add a chain here, so in the second case, my feelings, my beliefs and desires caused me to tremble, and that trembling of my hand caused the rope to be cut, leading to that effect. In the first scenario, it's also the same thing. My beliefs and my desires cause me to cut the rope. So it seems that in terms of causal analysis, these two cases are identical. We cannot even distinguish one added link here, because the first scenario is not a direct link. It's not that your mentality, your mental states directly cause that cutting. It has to go through the nervous system, and then it has to go through these fibers and the muscles, and they have to move. So there are a lot of chains here. So we cannot really argue that this one extra chain here is going to make all the difference. So basically what we have are two chains and one belief and desire who are acting as a sufficient cause for identical outcomes. So it seems that from the action point of view, these two scenarios are the same. In both of them, you were caused by your beliefs to act. But for us, there are clearly different cases. In the first case, you chose to cut the rope. In the second case, you didn't. We would treat them differently. You would feel about them differently. The amount of guilt would be different. Even in the court of law, we could make a different case for these two different scenarios. But so that's the problem with deviant causes. So you create a deviant causal chain, and then you show that if it's really the relation between our desire and beliefs to our action is really a causal thing, then I can extend this causal chain in ways that could get me to this kind of strange results that we should feel the same way about these two actions. There's the same thing, in both of them you decided to cut the rope, but you will say no, in the first case I did decide, but in the second case I did it, even though from the causal analysis they're both identical. So that's the problem of deviant causal chains for those who believe that we are caused by mental states. So that's the answer to the objection that our will is caused. In terms of compatibilism, so compatibilists believe that we can have determinism, but free will as well, because there are two different flavors to compatibilism. One is that we do not know the full history of the universe, or we do not know the full details of natural laws. So they are content with a kind of epistemic freedom, in the sense that yes, it's true that ontologically there's nothing, you cannot do anything different, but we don't know what we are going to do. So in a sense that because we don't know the full history of the universe and full details of natural laws, what you're going to do is not really clear to us. So in a sense, what you do or what you decide to do will give us information about those past history. So if you decide to, rob someone, and then we would know, okay, then you had this kind of history in your family, or these kind of natural laws were in act. But if you decide not to do it, then we would read a different history. It's not that you're actually causing change, like backward in time, but we are filling gaps epistemically. So that's the only freedom that they're happy with, that okay, as long as we don't know. So either you don't know the full history or you don't know the full details of natural laws. But the point is that even though you can play with it, which doesn't make sense to me that much, the point is that the blaming that we're talking about requires that kind of ontological freedom, because how can we blame anyone for not doing something that was determined to happen by the state of the universe millions of years before his existence? Because that's what determinism is. So one of the points about compatibilism is that they always talk about the future. Like, oh, you might decide to do this or decide to do that. We don't know, because we don't know all of these details. But imagine that you have this kind of trick that you say, okay, in those cases, I'm going to do that thing that I want to do, even though other people say don't do it, as soon as possible. Because the moment that I do it, like the moment that you know what, I'm going to steal that money. You steal that as soon as possible. Now, before that, everyone can blame you. They might want to blame you, so it's better if you do it as soon as possible. Because the moment that you do it, then how can anyone blame you for doing that? Because what you did, if someone blames you, you can just answer, it was metaphysically impossible for me, given the state of the universe millions of years before my existence, for me to do something else. So are you blaming me for not doing something that was determined by the state of the universe millions of years before my existence? How can you blame me for that? And I don't think anyone can. But that doesn't make any sense. We can't blame people for what they did in the past. So this kind of epistemic freedom, I don't think it's going to work. And compatibilism only makes sense if you really want to hold on to determinism. But as I've been trying to show in those videos, we don't really have any good argument for determinism. Like, there's no reason why we should hold determinism. There's no good argument. There's no good, modus ponens for it that shows determinism. There are no good scientific data to show determinism. So I really don't understand why we are so hung up on this concept of determinism. But anyway, so that's it. Yeah, that's for A Power of Will. It was a short one, but I believe if everyone, if anyone has gone through all of these lectures and come to this point and grasp this kind of understanding of person as this kind of simple entity constituted by body, if anyone comes up to this point, that they're already being freed from these sort of materialistic, deterministic view of the world. They have a much wider perspective now. So it's not that difficult to see easily. I mean, to observe easily that we do have such a power, and also that this power has these properties that I talked about. That it's non-causal, and it is spontaneous. And it's a fun thing to think about how it works, and how the non-causal part of it comes into play. And so that's it. Just next lecture would be last one probably on the series of metaphysics, which I would go through the objection for causal closure and show why that objection also doesn't work.